Hello and welcome to episode 8 in my how-to series. Today we're going to take a look at resin 3D printing. From what to look for when choosing your printer, to your first prints and some strategies for larger subjects. This one's been a long time coming, as I've been pushing the limits and discovering new techniques all the time. Okay, let's get started. Resin printers have been around for a few years now and are getting better and better all the time. Build volume, resolution and speed are the current features that the manufacturers are competing on. All resin printers at their heart rely on the same basic process, projecting an image via a screen through a resin-filled vat to cure resin onto a build plate in layers. This is the vat and build plate from my first resin printer, and by modern standards, it's tiny. Technology has certainly moved on quite a pace since then. The vat has a thin transparent FEP film stretched across its base, which can be replaced when it's damaged, such as this one which has a small hole in it. The build plate's raised and lowered in the vat by precise amounts, and it's this onto which the print is attached. These two components have to be well looked after and kept clean to ensure you get the best quality prints from your printer. So you want to buy a resin printer, but where do you start? It all seems pretty complicated, but here's the main points you need to consider. Firstly, build volume. This is the maximum space that the printer can create a printed part in. This is measured in millimeters and inches. This is not the size of the largest object you can print, as you'll need to orientate the part in the software so you can actually print it, which will take up more height in the build space. Next we have resolution. This is a bit complicated, but relates to how fine the printer will print. Screen resolutions are increasing, as is their size, but you have to be aware that just increasing the size and not the resolution will result in a lower resolution print. Fortunately, there is a shortcut to find a way to compare printers. In the printer specifications, check the pixel size of the screen used to project the image onto the build plate. This is measured in microns, and the smaller the number, the better. Anything under 40 microns is really good, but having said that, my M3 Max has a pixel size of 48 microns, and I get great results. Printer speed is increasing, meaning that larger prints can now be printed quicker, as printer and resin technology is improving. It's true, prints can take many hours to run, but build volume and resolution are more important features when choosing a printer. Don't buy a Ferrari if it won't fit in your garage. You may have to consider your available space for your printer as well. Resin printers are heavy and need to be on a sturdy bench. You'll also need room to post-process your prints, which can be messy. This brings me on to wash and cure stations. Many manufacturers sell these as well, often bundled with the printer. They're about the same size as the printer and do exactly what they say, wash and cure your prints. If you don't have space or the budget, you can go DIY, which I have with my setup. It's far more important to get the right printer first. Finally, we come to cost. These printers are mainly made in China and, relying on volume of sales, are very competitively priced, with new models coming out all the time. Prices are continuing to fall and specifications rise. The two main manufacturers are currently Anycubic and Elegoo. In short, choose a printer with a decent build volume and low pixel size. Anything else is a bonus. As a guide, work out the largest item you want to print and set this as your minimum build volume. Then look for the best resolution for that size. Be very careful buying second-hand. These are delicate precision machines, and I've heard horror stories of people buying damaged printers. Manufacturers have their own ranges of resin and also sell FDM 3D printers as well. The two brands are constantly trying to outdo each other and often offering deals on printers. I've bought their printers from distributors and Amazon and never had a problem. So you've pulled the pin and ordered your printer. What else are you going to need? Well, you will need some resin. This mainly comes in light-proof plastic bottles, and there are lots of different types. I recommend just starting with the standard grades and use others when you have a specialist need. Water-washable resin is available, which makes cleanup easier, but I recommend sticking to grey resin as it's easier to see areas of your print that need filling and filing. Resin can settle out into its constituent parts, so always make sure the bottle is well shaken before use. So what else will you need? Well, here are the items I use the most. You will need to buy some disposable gloves. This is very important. Residue from resin will irritate your skin for days. I've been there, it's unpleasant. I now wear gloves every time I remove and clean a print. Isopropyl alcohol, or IPA. You'll need a lot of this to rinse off the excess resin from your prints. It's best bought in bulk and is often sold 5 litres at a time. Shop around, but make sure it's at least 99% pure. You can easily get it through Amazon and other places. Scrapers. These will often come with the printer. The soft plastic one is provided to stir your vat, and the sharp metal one is to remove your prints from the build plate. Do not use the metal one in your vat, you will ruin your printer. Paper towels. Spills occur, always have some of these at hand. The residue from cleaning prints remains sticky for days, so use these and the isopropyl alcohol to keep your surfaces clean. Coarse sandpaper. You don't need much of this, 60 grit will be fine. Cheap disposable paintbrushes. These are very useful. I use these to stir the resin in the vat, as it settles out over time, leaving a white film at the bottom. To thoroughly clean my prints, I also use a spray bottle with IPA and an air line to blast away the resin from all the details. For the really delicate prints, I use an old airbrush. To remove the supports from your prints, you'll need a variety of tools. These are the ones I use: some long-nose pliers, nail cutters, a pick and tweezers. These items are all things I regularly use for my prints. You may find other items that work for you. So the big day comes and your new printer arrives. These things are incredibly well packed, so don't rush. Make sure you have plenty of space and take your time. Enjoy the process. This is my Anycubic M3 Max, bought via Amazon, but is typical of what to expect. You will get some instructions on initial setup for your printer. This will allow you to set the level of the build plate, although with some printers this is now an automatic feature. Follow these instructions carefully and you should be all good for your first print. Pour some resin into the vat, no higher than the maximum line, insert the USB drive into the side, and select the test print. This will give you an idea of what to expect while the printer is running. Resin printers are fairly quiet, but you may notice the smell of the resin. Some printers come with filters, which can help. It's always best to have the printer in a well-ventilated room, and when not in use for a long period of time, stir up the resin and drain it back into the bottle it came in. Sometime later, and you should have the test print, hopefully without any problems if the printer's working correctly. Once removed from the build plate and rinsed in IPA, you should get something like this. Okay, that's great, but you've just found this kick-ass figure online that you downloaded and want to print. How do you do that? Well, you're going to need some slicer software. Don't freak out just yet, it's free and fairly easy to use. Here you'll have a choice. There are a few available, but these are the main ones. Just go to the sites, download and install. Today we're going to prep and print this guy. He's called a Roboxer. This is the current Anycubic slicer. The layout's pretty easy and we have all the basic functions we need to move, scale and rotate. Lightsheet does exactly the same with a similar interface. Again, clear and easy to use. This is highly recommended. Chitubox also works well, but feels a bit more basic, trying to get you to pay for advanced features. I would suggest starting with one and then trying the others to see what you prefer. Okay, you've downloaded and installed your software. You now need to make some choices when it comes to setting up your print. Firstly, layer height. This is the vertical resolution of your print and is measured in microns. A lower layer height will give you better detail, less layer lines, but take longer to print. I print almost everything at 20 microns, with only very small parts at 10 microns. Next we need to look at print angle. You'll need to angle your print so that each layer can be printed on its predecessor. If you imagine an upturned pyramid, that should help. In some cases, not all areas will have this support, so you'll need to add support of your own. 45 degrees is generally considered the starting point for a good print, minimizing any layer lines. Remember, you can angle the print in 2 axes. There is, however, an optimum print angle for any model of printer and layer height. This is the inverse tangent of the layer height divided by the pixel width. I found the best way of working this out is to do the dividing bit on a calculator, then ask Google to work out the arctan. An important setting to check is the anti-aliasing. This smooths out the print surface, reducing the appearance of layer lines, but can also reduce detail. I recommend starting with the lowest setting and see how you get on. Okay, let's prep this bad boy for printing. With him imported into an older version of the Anycubic slicer, I begin by rotating him to an angle where we can easily support the overhangs. You will have to decide on a front and a back for your part. The front being the support-free side, the back having the majority of the supports and requiring most of the cleaning up afterwards. You can see that by rotating we've increased the height. This is one reason why you need to choose a printer with a bigger build volume. With the angle set, I also need to raise him by about 5 to 6 mm to allow for the supports. Then I go into the support settings and view the underside of the figure. The red areas are where the printer will struggle, and I need to add supports. I always begin by adding the heavy, primary supports. These are not only to allow the resin to be deposited, but importantly to tie the model firmly back to the build plate. There are strong forces attaching the print to the FEP film, and you don't want the print to come away from the build plate during printing. With the primary heavy supports added, I add the medium supports to areas that I feel may be problematic based on experience. You shouldn't be afraid of adding too many supports. It'll only leave you a little bit more to clean up and is far quicker than reprinting. Finally, I add the light supports to the areas not directly above the build plate. These are to carry the fine detail parts of the model. So here he is, fully supported. I've also set up the base for printing, so the two can be printed together. Now I just hit the slice button and the file is prepared for the printer. Depending on the print and printer size, this can take several minutes. Bulky prints can be hollowed out in the slicer software to save resin and weight. Generally, 2mm wall thickness is recommended. To help flush out the print, drain holes can also be added. If you do hollow the print out and then drill holes in it later, unless plugged, your model will weep resin for months, so beware. Here the figure is hollow and the base is solid, just so you can see the difference. A few minutes later and our parts are sliced. These are the individual slices that will be printed in sequence. It's worth scrolling through them to check for any obvious issues before printing. If you follow an individual support, it'll give you an understanding of how the print builds up. In the top right corner, you can see some of the stats on the print, including the print time. Before you start printing again, you'll need to stir the resin in the vat. It settles out pretty quickly and can leave a film on the bottom of the vat, which can reduce your print quality. To mix the resin, I use a disposable plastic brush and wipe it around gently in the vat until the resin is thoroughly mixed. You can also use this method to check if there are any print remnants on the film or in the vat as well. In a quest for the ultimate print quality, calibration files are available, so you can fine adjust your printer to your resin. These calibration cones are a popular choice and give a clear result. This is the result I got with the original settings and is quite acceptable. A decent printer straight out of the box with quality resin shouldn't need any adjustment. Okay, let's get back to printing Roboxer and plug the USB into the printer. Just select the item to print and hit go. It looks like this may take a while. During the printing process, the resin may need topping up. You can do this any time without pausing the printer. This printer has an auto top-up feature, but is easily done straight from the bottle. It's important to make sure the resin is well mixed before you add it to the vat. You can add the resin while the print is running without any issue. When the print's finished, you'll need to remove any excess resin. This is my DIY setup, as having a large printer takes up too much space for an additional wash and cure station. I use a storage box with a lid filled with IPA and first rinse the parts on the build plate. This build plate is massive and weighs over a kilo. Then I use the sharp scraper to remove the parts. These are not Roboxer parts. The parts are then individually rinsed in the IPA. For this stage, gloves are essential. Resin is nasty on your skin, I know. This box is just topped up with IPA as needed. Over a period of time, the resin settles to the bottom and the IPA clears if you aren't using it. To further remove excess resin from the detail, I take each part and after a spray of IPA, blast them with an air line. This is very effective at getting resin out of all the detail. Here I'm using an old airbrush as these small seats are very delicate. Again, wearing gloves. With the excess resin removed, parts can be cured now or after the supports have been removed. Before curing, the parts are still soft and delicate, but curing makes them more brittle. In most cases, it's better to remove the supports pre-curing. Again, personal choice. To cure my parts, I just use a cheap UV lamp and solar turntable from Amazon. Nothing fancy. You just have to make sure you get a similar wavelength to the resin for it to work. Before I start on the print, I make sure that the build plate is thoroughly cleaned with IPA and wipes dry. This came with a laser etched pattern, which over the years has worn off. To ensure the build plate has a good key for that important first layer, I gently scuff it with the coarse sandpaper to give the next print the best chance of adhesion. And here's the cured Roboxer and base. As you can see, there's a forest of supports to remove, but the print is all good. I'm using nail cutters here, starting at the base of the supports, as it places less strain on the print, preventing fine detail from getting broken off. Then it's just a process of chipping away, working up the supports to the print itself. If this print were uncured, it would be possible to peel away the supports in one unit. Removing them post-curing is very messy. I just use a fine pick to remove the hard-to-reach smallest supports. The base is a similar story, but I can be more brutal here as there's far less detail. With the supports removed, I can use scalpels, files and fine sandpaper to clean up the print. Small nubs remain where some of the supports were, and these need to be filed or trimmed back carefully. In other areas, the supports have left small holes in the surface. These can be quickly filled with superglue and spray activator. This technique works well even on detailed areas when the superglue is applied with a fine point. Once cured after a few seconds, the superglue can be filed and sanded back, or pared down with a scalpel. And here's our finished Roboxer, all cleaned up and mounted on the base. One of the other things the slicer software can do is mirror your part, so you can have a pair of bookends if you wish. These come out great, and here's another figure that got the same treatment, so you can see what can be achieved. You will see a lot of people using figures for demo printing, which is a bit of a cop-out, as these are fairly easy to print and look great. Even if the print distorts during printing, it'll still be passable. We're now going to take a look at some printing problems, what causes them, and techniques to minimise them. These are a few, and here's how they can be overcome. We mentioned before about the forces involved between the print and the FEP. This isn't a problem for small parts, but for larger parts, this can be a major issue. You'll have to learn to compromise between print quality, print time, and print distortion. This trade-off highlights the limitation of resin printers, and where FDM printers can often produce a better result. The biggest problem with large prints is distortion. We must remember that the print is still soft in the printer, and the adhesion of the fresh layer to the FEP film puts a lot of strain on it. This distortion may not be noticeable on a figure, but on a geometric part, it'll be obvious. There are several causes, the first being the weight of the print. As you print, gravity pulls the print down, and this can easily distort it. Hollowing the part can help, but ensuring the part is well supported and, if possible, printed directly onto the build plate helps a lot. This print for my Slave 1 looks great, well orientated for print quality, nice and crisp. But when you look at the lower skirt, you can see the wave of distortion in it, caused by the weight of the print pulling it down. This 40-hour print went in the bin. The solution to this problem was to print the part in 2 parts and print them directly on the build plate. This did mean a lot of additional internal supports, but the prints came out dimensionally perfect, without any distortion. The next distortion issue is faced by flat objects, which often print bowed or curved. This is caused by the adhesion of the print to the FEP. The solution is to set your part near the edge of the build plate, where there's less distortion of the FEP film, and print the part as vertical as possible, taking into consideration the surface detail. Printing upright will mean longer print times, but you'll get a far better print. These floors for Slave 1 were printed vertically and have no distortion. A word of warning, don't try and print them flat on the build plate to reduce print time. The high cross-sectional area will cause the print to fail. This takes us on to the final form of distortion, banding. If you're printing something that has sudden changes in cross-section, the increase in adhesion to the build plate can make the change in thickness visible on the surface. In the worst cases, this will affect other prints on the build plate. All of these parts were printed at the same time. The large parts have internal walls or bulkheads and were printed directly onto the build plate. The distortion caused by these has affected all of the prints on this print job, even the smaller ones. The larger parts can be filled and filed, but the smaller parts need reprinting. The solution to this would be to angle the parts on the build plate to minimise the cross-section. I chose not to, as I wanted the parts to be perfectly square and dimensionally accurate, which they were. This is an example of the trade-off you may have to make. You can print incredible things with a resin printer. These are the wings to my Slave 1, which took 39 hours to print each one. There just isn't an economical, accurate alternative to this technology, and when understood you can use it to create incredible objects. You can see more on my massive Slave 1 model, printed in resin, in the Slave 1 playlist on my channel. It'll give you some more examples of print orientation and support practices. I hope you found this episode of my how-to series interesting. If you did, share with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and make sure you click on the bell icon so you get notified when my next video goes live. Don't forget to check out some of the other projects on my channel to discover more model making techniques. If you have any questions about issues raised in this series, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.